Hi, everyone, and a massive welcome to the next episode of the CISO Experience. My name's Simon Lindstead. I'm the founder and host of the InfoSec Live community. And today I'm going to be joined by Brian Bobo, who's the Chief Digital and Security Officer for Greenway Health. He's responsible for overseeing the hosted environments of thousands of clients, passionate about building teams and fostering collaborations, and very skilled at creating long-term cyber strategies. Very excited to have him with me today as a guest. So a big thank you before we start to our sponsor, Bramfit Technology Labs, who without their support, this brand new series would not be possible. And for those watching today, please do like and subscribe our content if you enjoy it. So without further ado, a quick stinger from our sponsor, and we'll bring Brian on. A massive welcome, Brian. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. Please give our audience and me a little bit of background about yourself.
Well, yes. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. A little bit about my background. I've been in IT security and in IT for, I have to think about it now, 15, 20 years. I didn't start out that way, so it's, but I've been in leadership positions for 30 years now, which is kind of scary to say that. I don't feel like I'm that old, but I've been a CISO for an airline, for a logistics company, and now for a healthcare software company, and had a lot of really interesting experiences along the way. Also, I worked for Target and their security team and other areas of Target, and then with Ecolab, their security. So,
well, I feel like we've skimmed over a really important bit before we've got to the security part. So you mentioned 15, 20 years in the industry, but then you said 30 years in leadership. Take me back, because obviously what you were doing before, Brian's had a massive impact probably on where you've ended up in your career. So let's talk about that for a bit first.
yeah, it's interesting because when I go all the way back, right out of high school, I enlisted into the Army and ended up going into counterintelligence. And at that time, I just didn't want to go straight to college, and I wanted to go in the FBI. So I called the FBI and said, "Well, how do you do that? How do I become an agent?" And they said, "Well, become a lawyer or an accountant." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. Those don't sound that exciting." Or they said, "Get some experience." And I said, "Well, what about counterintelligence?" And they said, "That's perfect." So got to go to Germany, and I thought, okay, I'll just use the benefits, go to college, and then I'll join the FBI. And then while I was enlisted, I got the opportunity to go to college with the Army, and ended up becoming an officer and in tanks, so an armor officer. But and did some really interesting things in that experience. And then so that's really where my leadership started, was in the Army. And so I left the active duty, went in the National Guard. I've been in the National Guard ever since. And then held positions in manufacturing, in target distribution centers, before I went into security, just by dumb luck, because not dumb luck, I worked for it, I guess, but the Army deployed me, and I came back, and of course in a leadership position, they have to backfill it. So I kind of describe it as I was employed, but I didn't have a job, and they weren't really sure what to do with me. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go find my own job. And so I networked, and Target has this really great attitude of, we want leaders first, and the rest of that we'll figure out. So I ended up, through that process, ended up in IT, doing security and managing privileged access management for all of Target, before security was fun and exciting and sexy and anybody wanted to do it. And so that was the dumb luck part. And that's what got me into security, and ended up doing a number of things, including running Target SOC right before the breach happened. And
I noticed you said before, not during there, Brian.
Yes. Yeah, I actually left before it was discovered. I think before it actually happened, because this, discovered and happened aren't the same.
No.
And yeah, I left at just the right moment, but or the wrong moment, because I really felt bad about what happened to my team, of course, and
Yeah.
But I still got deposed, the lawsuits and the SEC and all those kind of things, which was actually a fantastic experience. That's something that I think a lot of CISOs don't appreciate. I mean, maybe superficially the legal part of it, but when you're talking about risk, it's not just technology or the things you put in place or the teams or those kind of things. Thinking about the contractual piece of it, and the legal part of how you mitigate some of that risk, and then also understanding that you're going to get deposed if there is a really big lawsuit. And that's something that I don't know if, I haven't talked to a lot of CISOs that talk about that part of it. So, I mean, I probably bugged the heck out of our lawyers because I'm constantly saying, we talk about what a risk. I'm like, do our contracts protect us against somebody picking a really bad password and being susceptible to phishing and,
Yeah.
compromising their own credentials? That we can't control that. And so, but anyway, so that was a really great experience in terms of learning about the whole, kind of broader spectrum of risk management. And then, since then I've been, the whole time I was with Target, and then the subsequent security positions I've held have all been leadership positions. And I've had opportunities where I've taken on things that are non-traditional, like disaster recovery, which fits, right? I mean, a lot of people
Yeah.
talk about security and that together, but actually leading a team to re-architect data centers to be more resilient for DR, or taking the desktop team because they weren't getting any love because nobody cares about the desktop team, and saying, hey, there's enough security concerns with that. I'm going to just take that team. And then, so what that led to was my current position. When I started with Greenway, I was a CISO, and I came here because, being a software company, it also gives me a ton of opportunity to interact with our customers, help with the sales cycle, help, sell the security side of it, which I also did at a logistics company. Also interact with our clients and help really sell security, help the sales force understand how to do that. And that was more on the physical security side, but it was still, I loved doing that. So I've gotten a lot of that opportunity to interact with our clients, either help a sale, save one that wants to leave because they think there's, a better option out there, and talk to them. So started out as a CISO. They were having trouble hiring a CIO. And so I just said, hey, you know what? I've done enough CIO stuff that I can cover that for you until you find one. Well, within 2 days, I was a CIO and a CISO. So that's been a great opportunity. And then
Is that
then,
still the case now, Brian? You still doing
yeah,
both roles? Yeah.
and then we started a big automation effort using robots. So I took over the automation piece of the digital transformation side of things. So now I'm also the chief digital officer, as of the first of the year. So that's really exciting. We've done since we've taken that team over, and fixed the governance and the frameworks we're using, how we engage the business and all these things, we've been able to make a ton of progress, digitizing the business processes and saving money and saving labor, of course. And so that's been exciting, and then translating the automation into how do you do that with security? How do you do it with other things? And then we've rebranded our cloud offerings to what we call our Greenway Secure Cloud. And so I'm the face of the secure cloud, and have become more or less a sales overlay with that to help the sales teams. So
let me just jump in there, because
yeah,
one, I'll forget if I don't say it now because my memory is terrible. But it's relevant to everything you've been saying. I've been sort of smirking along with you because it's very unusual for a CISO, well, for a start, to have like 3 separate jobs, but also to be so heavily involved in the sales process side of it for the company. But do you think the role of a CISO is changing? So it's changed already the last few years. Historically, it's been a very technically orientated job. Personally, moving forward, I see it as a little bit different to that. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, I think it's changed quite a bit. I mean, I think software is unique in that security should be a big part of your brand if you're selling software. So I think a CISO to be in a position like me and part of that sales cycle in a software company makes a lot of sense because it's part of our brand and it's and we should differentiate ourselves in that way. Um, but I think in general, what we're seeing is CISOs are really being elevated in the organization, whether it's actually on the org chart elevated or um, just their exposure. So things like interacting with the board, interacting with the executives. As a CISO, if I call the CEO, he calls me back all the time, or he picks up. And having that kind of a relationship, you need to operate at that level and understand how executives, EVPs think, so that you can communicate with them and then express risk and really, be able to tell them what you need in a way that they understand.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's really changed is if you're an executive in a large company and you don't appreciate security anymore, you're probably not going to be an executive in that company very long. So we're past I mean, I think every company's different, but my experience for the most part, we're past oh, this is just cost. We shouldn't do this. We don't need to do it. It's optional to, well, how do we prioritize what's most important and tell me how we're closing risk and which is the
Yeah, I mean,
biggest thing.
I think you're right from an enterprise and kind of SME point of view. I think
Yep.
most people have caught up to the fact it's important. However, looking at micro businesses and
Yeah.
the smaller businesses in the economy, I still wonder, especially with the way services are marketed and sold, how they can ever consider adopting that in. I know how tight profit margins are when you're running a business. To suddenly have to find another 5-10% for a security budget, it's going to be a big ask, isn't it?
It is. And it's also, so that, that those problems require different solutions, and smaller company need to be a lot more pragmatic and really think about biggest bang for your buck. What's the most important thing you can do? And how do you best do it? But then bigger companies, you still have to think. So CISOs are becoming part of the leadership teams of companies and part of the business teams of companies. And so we still have a responsibility to be as efficient as possible to drive costs out of security without reducing or without increasing risk, and thinking about things in terms of this is an investment. So, somebody told me this, and I can't remember how many years ago, but there's only three things or three reasons you should do something in a business: either you make money, you save money, or the government told you had to do it. And we're really we're in the government told us we have to do it. But I think
Yeah.
leaders also understand when you get sued and that's expensive. Breaches are really expensive. And so when you can articulate that potential issue and how you mitigate it, then it becomes more of an investment. At least it sounds like an
It
investment.
does, and the only other, not problem, but issue, I suppose, is cyber insurance sometimes gives people that
Yeah,
comfort blanket, but what it doesn't do is anything for your reputational risk, which in itself can absolutely destroy a business.
absolutely. And the other piece that's complicating is the cyber insurance requirements are getting very onerous and driving a lot of this. So again, it goes back to how do you close these gaps, but do it in a way where you're doing it as economically and efficiently as possible. And there's a lot of, I think in the past it's been, so after the Target breach, it was like, oh, we got to fix this, throw money at it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily fix anything depending on how you implement it, right? But the other piece of it too that's becoming more and more important, and it fits with all of the things that I said before, is the leadership side of it. Because the people piece of all of this is absolutely the most important thing. Hiring really good people, and creating a really good culture where people work together, because none of this technology works if you don't have the right people and if your processes fall apart. which is kind of what happened at Target. It was a process problem, I think, more than anything, at the end of the day. And you need to be able to hire really good people, build really good teams, build a culture. So when you build a team of, really good people and you have really good culture, obviously you got a great team, and that part's good. But what happens is it bleeds into the rest of the organization. So then when you're talking about a security issue, or you're trying to get buy-in on something, the rest of the company has a positive view of that team. You'll find people want to join the team, and when they hear concerns, they trust that opinion, and they trust the team, it builds belief in the competence of the team. And I always tell people, when if you send a message like during a breach, you're really sending two messages. One is an update, but the way you update it is your secondary message is you are conveying competence. And when we have this, you don't need to worry about it. I'm going to tell you what I need from you, and here's what I'm going to update you next. But that's the message behind the message. And the same thing when you build really good teams. And so it really helps you push your agenda forward and get people to support security. And so that piece of it, the leadership piece, and leading as an executive as an equal on the rest of the team, even if you aren't part of the ELT, you don't have an E in front of your title, EVP, CISO, it's just a VP of CISO or senior director or director. Part of where I think I've been successful is that being very pragmatic, but also very forceful when it comes to security in a tactful way, but not asking permission, not saying, it's fine that you don't want to patch this month, or, the business overrode me, I can't do it.
Do this. Yeah.
Right. Instead, it's, no, you don't have an option. We have to do it. And being firm. And then because of all the other, the goodwill you've built up in terms of, hey, they know what they're doing. If they tell me this is important, it must be important. If they tell me no, then one of the people that worked for me a long time ago talked about it as solving for yes, which I love that expression. So no, you can't do it that way, or you told me what you wanted. I'm going to give you what you need, and here's how we're gonna get to where you want to be. And then the small times where you actually do have to say no, people will accept it because they know that no is not your default answer, right? And that if you say it, you really mean it, and there must be no other way to do it. So, not that that's always an easy conversation either, but that's where I think the CISO role is evolving into more of a senior leader, an executive type of leadership presence and approach that you need to take, but also being part of the business. And so, one of the things so I sit in our quarterly business reviews for the entire business, and I'll ask the salespeople questions about, well, why you just said this, why that has nothing to do with technology, or I'll ask HR things because obviously talent's important. But I take the approach where I'm just another leader in the business, and we should be asking each other questions so that we're all successful. Absolutely. And it's really helping each other out. It's not catching each other. And so, plus it's fun.
That's back to the culture, though, isn't it? Yeah. It's not tripping each other up or catching out each other. It's working together, and that all goes back to being led from the top properly. You're talking about the importance of bringing teams together. One of the biggest challenges I've heard when speaking to CISOs is developers and security teams, and lots of solutions for that. You hear the terminology security champions, which some people have got different opinions on. Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with embedding security into a development team? And if so, was it difficult?
Yes. So and yes. There's both questions.
I shouldn't have asked you closed questions then either, really, should I?
Yes,
Tell me
yeah.
about the time you
Well,
had to. There you go.
I told you I've been deposed too, right? If they ask yes, no
Yeah,
question, you say yes and stop,
yeah,
um, or no. But so the approach we've taken is, with developers, most of them just, I think it's getting better, but a lot of them were never taught how to securely develop, right? So, and they get frustrated because they go through the whole thing, then we test it and go, nope, try again, fix all these things. And so we've said we need to take the approach where we help teach them. So
yeah,
we've built educational courses into their sprints, so they actually have to take time during a sprint to work on that. And again, great, because we have great partnership with our company, with our developers and the leadership there and our product teams. And also they understand if we're selling a product that's not secure, that people quit buying it.
but
And
this
they
this
see.
is this is where you come in though, Brian, isn't it?
Right.
It's making sure the board understand how important that is from a risk point of view, because
Absolutely.
the pressures on developers to have it ready and have it released are immense. And I feel
Yes.
a lot of the people I've spoken to end up becoming like a gatekeeper in between the two
Yeah.
departments rather than a facilitator.
Yes. Well, I think it also shows that, hey, we're not just here to slap your wrist and tell you you're wrong. We want to give you the tools so that we never have to tell you you can't release something or you ever have to fix something, which is obviously ideal state, but we never get to. But the other thing that we've had to do in that case is, there's certain processes they follow, and we found some gaps in different ways they were doing things, and it's a way they've done it forever.
Yeah,
Where we had to say, no, you can't do it that way anymore.
yeah.
And they complain and they don't want to do it. And uh, sorry,
No,
this
no
isn't
one likes change, Brian.
right. Right. And, but I think that also highlights, to me, that's a great example where almost every security team I've taken over has this attitude that the business can veto things. They've gotten beaten up in the past. Nobody had their back. They couldn't put their foot down and say, this is the way it needs to be done. And so the approach I've taken is use me as a bad guy.
Yeah,
So just, you're not the one telling them to do it. Tell them that I told you that that's the way it needs to happen. And if they don't like it, they can come talk to me. And
yeah,
what's interesting is I've only ever had maybe two people ever come talk to me after that conversation, because they know they're not, they know that what we're asking is the right way to do things, which is
yeah,
again part of building that confidence in our team. And it also takes a lot of the stress off of our team, but it lets us to start being assertive about security where it makes sense. And there have been times where I've said, I get what you're saying, to one of my security team members, but let's look at this a different way. And is there another way that we could solve this problem? And the business knows that I'll facilitate those kind of conversations. But when I say no, I mean no. But the danger of all this is that you have to change the culture of the entire security team because they're so used to not being able to be assertive about certain things that really need to happen, and
yeah,
accepting a developer telling them they can't do something. So then what you have is an associate security engineer and a developer basically making risk decisions for the entire company. And so having the conversations of, you don't get to make those decisions. And in fact, I don't get to make them either, right? This is something
yeah.
that the executives need to make, the board potentially needs to make. And so this isn't optional, guys. Like, we need to really, enforce this. And so shifting that, because what you'll find is that's where you get the surprises of, you release that with what kind of defect in it? Oh, well, it's been that way for 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, or that's the way we've always done it. It's like, and you didn't say anything. And so that's to me, that's a big challenge, is shifting the team's mindset, because they've been beaten down and told, and not able to really advocate for security in so many ways. the business always had the option to veto them, or
And
developers, or,
then
you know,
again, that's where the talent of a CISO comes in, not just being able to communicate with board level, but being able to communicate with
with
the people who've got their hands on the keyboards. And
right.
I think that's crucially important, isn't it? And it must be very, very difficult to be able to do both at the same time.
Yeah, it's well, you know, it's funny is I think it's actually easier this way. You know, because I could expend a lot of emotional energy on trying to argue something with somebody, or accepting no for an answer when I know it's wrong, or I can just be assertive about it. Again, but I've built up the relationships, and I've gotten myself to a position, and people know that I solve for yes. They know that I'm saying that because that's the way it needs to happen, not because I'm trying to be a jerk. And
Yeah,
I'm doing it for the good of the entire organization. Um, but it makes the by pushing some of that down, and being willing to be the bad guy also makes it easier on you, because now you're not fighting these little battles and fires that never should have happened to begin with, because you're stopping that early on in the
you've
process.
set your stall out already. Yeah,
Yeah. So
massively important.
I think you know, it's sometimes it's hard to shift that, and I'm still, I mean, the culture of IT in general and IT security is, you know, you're still fighting some of these things of somebody decides, well, we can't do multi-factor, it's too expensive.
Yeah,
Okay, you don't decide that it's too expensive. We need to do it. Tell me how much it's going to cost. We'll figure
yeah,
out how to do it as cheaply as we possibly can, but it's not an option. Um,
yeah.
Now, having said that, we have multi-factor about every place you can possibly imagine at our current company, which is really good. But that's just a great example of, well, it's $3 a person per month. We can't afford that. That's not your decision. Well, first of all, that's before you negotiate it. Second of all, which you should know that, right? And so teaching directors how to think about things like this differently, and it's our job to say, here's the gap, here's what we need to close it, here's what it's going to cost, or the resources we need to do it. And you, the board or executives, you decide whether or not you want to close that gap or accept it.
Yeah, accept the risk or close the risk.
Right.
Absolutely. Um, you might have answered a lot of this already, but what would you say your biggest success is in your security career so far?
I would say, when I look at my career in general, I really look at things that, you know, so one big success I think is changing cultures and getting the security team to a position where they feel comfortable and confident in asserting things that we need them to do. Um, and that and changing that mindset, along with changing the mindset of security to be, um, we want to be transparent. And so what I've said in the past is we want people to be able to work anywhere from any device securely at any time. And ideally in a way that you don't even know that we're securing your device. Like ideally, you wouldn't even have a password, right? So the big vision is that we have zero impact on the end user, which changes a lot of the ways you think about how you implement security, and the successes you see that come from that, because we usually can do something two or three different ways, and there's a way you can do that's easier on people, or things you can do in the background. And that turns into, again, the business saying, hey, these guys are actually trying to make our lives easier, because I know I need a 14 character password, but I hate that, and so do I, right? Nobody wants that. So
Yeah,
this multi-factor that we're implementing is actually a lot better. So that was one. I think another would be, and it's not directly security related, but I was asked to move a good portion of my team's work to India, which is hugely impactful on a team. And I think the traditional approach is you hire as many people as you can in India, and then you have an event and you let people go in a big wave. And I think we've all seen that.
yeah,
Um, so what I did instead, which is kind of ruffled some feathers from executives that think like that, is I just brought the team together and said, here's what's happening. And here's the rough timeline we're looking at. but we're going to have to send about half of our work to India. And so that's going to impact you guys. And we're going to talk to you about how that works. But we're also going to help you with the transition. We're going to offer to, be a reference for you. Things that you don't normally do or aren't allowed to do, but we're going to help you through this because we want you to find another job. We want you to land on your feet, and we're going to warn you. So if I let you go, I'm going to give you 60 days. So you'll have 60 days to find another role, plus you'll get whatever the severance is, which again is something they say, don't ever do that, right? And so
open up a can of worms, I think is what they say.
Yeah. So they were like, oh man, everyone's going to leave and you're not. And so what happened was we followed that up with really targeted conversations with key people we really wanted to keep and retention bonuses. And unfortunately, I think, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, the teams I build, we don't have a lot of dead weight. So something like that event wasn't an opportunity to let people go that we should have let go long ago. So we had to make some really hard choices. But what ended up happening in the end was we helped people that want to stay we found jobs for them in other parts of Greenway that wanted to stay with Greenway and helped the organization that way. So they found jobs. And then every single role that opened up was somebody that found another job with another company. And we thanked them and told them good luck. And if they ever want to come back, let us know. We'll see what we can do kind of approach. And thinking about it, there's a CEO that I heard that talked about this in terms of you shouldn't view these people who leave your company as ex-employees. You should view them as alumni. Yeah. Because just because they decide to leave doesn't mean they should be dead to you. You may, maybe they want to come back, and that might be a really good thing. And
there's also a website called Glassdoor as well that you might think about.
Yeah. So obviously that whole conversation created a lot of angst. But every single one of my team that gave me feedback said, I appreciate the transparency.
Yeah. That's what's important. That's what people want. They'd rather have the transparency than excuse my French, the bullshit that they normally get.
Yeah. Well, and what was interesting was, there were people, I expected half of them just to leave right then. And it took a while for the attrition to happen the way it did. And there were some people that I won't mention what team it was, but there's one team I was like, you guys need to find other jobs. We told you that your team is going to India. Like, what are you doing? Like, I just didn't say that to them, but and they just did not want to leave.
That speaks volumes about the business, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so, but what ended up happening, which was really great, was we found every one of those folks a job somewhere else in Greenway.
So their plan worked.
It did. It worked. Yeah, it did. It did. And and obviously we have an advantage in terms of we're a technology company, so a lot of our team can do things somewhere else in the company as well. But anyway, so that I talk about things that I'm proud of in my career. I really look at things like that. The security side of it is great and it's exciting, but none of that works without a great team. And there's other things that more recent things I've really enjoyed in terms of interacting with clients when we've had big problems and being able to save that relationship, save the business, sell them on security, and have these really great interactions where I have. It was funny, we did our big conference and one of the CIOs from one of our large customers, I just saw like this streak out of the corner of my eye. She came flying up to me in the expo hall and grabbed me and she said, I haven't talked to you in 9 months and I'm really happy about that. I was like, oh. And she said, because you fixed all the problems we had and I haven't had to talk to you. And then she, said, I'm sorry I was such a jerk to you and so hard on you or whatever. And I was like, are you kidding me? You think I let my vendors off? Of course you're mad. I would be mad too. But
Yeah.
now we're friends, and those are the kind of things when I think about my career that I am, most proud of. I guess it's those kind of things.
It's taking ownership of the problems and getting them dealt with, no matter how uncomfortable it is. I think a lot of
Right.
people shy away from that and try and pass the buck, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's and it's definitely that's a part of the leadership challenge too, right? It's you're obviously not leading your customers, but it's dealing with
Well,
people.
yeah,
And I love dealing with people. I love even the I don't actually love the problems, but I love solving people problems, and figuring out how to get teams to work better together and hiring really great people and building really good teams. Um, and it's also, I mean, it's a great way to make your life easy. You hire
yeah,
really great people, give them some guide rails, and then just get out of the way. And
yeah.
so then you can focus on bigger things that, like dealing with the board and the CEO and those kind of.
And the other word, the C word, which you mentioned earlier, which was challenges, which seamlessly leads me on to my next question. Hope you like how I did that there. What what do you see the biggest challenges being at the moment? I suppose what are your biggest challenges at the moment? And then broader than that, where do you see the challenges are for the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, um, so for us, I think the challenges really come down to making sure that we're able to get really good people, because I think everybody's challenged by that right now.
Yeah,
But also thinking about things differently, where maybe in the past we would have said, "Oh, we need to hire a team." Now maybe a managed service makes more sense,
yeah.
because now you're buying a gold standard, industry leading whatever service,
Up and running service that you can plug
and
in.
I
Yeah,
can't replicate that. And so I think sims are a great example, MDRs, where you know back in the good old days, you try to write your own rules in the sim, and you try to build this thing out, and it just never worked. You couldn't write enough rules, you couldn't keep up with everything going on. And like, even when I was at Target, I think when I left, we were at about 1 billion events a day hitting our sim, and that was just scratching the surface, right? I mean, that's not even a fraction of the whole internet. And so trying to do that yourself versus a company that's doing that for 2,000 companies, who's going to have better visibility, right? I mean, they just quit trying to hire level one SOC analysts, because nobody wants to be a level one SOC analyst, and you'll never keep them on the team. Um, so I think they're thinking about things differently and constantly questioning where you're at is the biggest challenge. Because just
and
what I've been doing last year probably is is still all right. What if I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years? I'm probably missing something. Um, we're not doing it well enough. So, and then getting everything to work together, so you can have visibility across different technologies when something happens. I think is always a challenge. Ransomware is just insanely challenging
yeah,
because
I
of
think
where it's going.
everyone says the same. For it's the biggest kind of a direct
Yeah,
risk, I suppose, to the business in
yeah,
the cyber sense. And I
and
don't see
so
that
much.
getting any better either.
It's too much money in it. Too many smart people with a lot of technology, right?
Do
Figuring
you
out.
know what I think another problem is? And I can say this because I don't work for one of these vendors, but
Mhm.
maybe I shouldn't because I'm representing Bramfit. You'll let me know, Lewis, if I shouldn't have said this or not. It, a lot of it's driven by massive marketing budgets and
Yeah.
these kind of plug and play box ticking solutions that will solve problems. And I think they've got a lot to answer for with the direction the industry's gone. And I don't know how many times you've said in this conversation, culture, people, 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 people. It's the
Yeah.
people where the money should be invested in, perhaps before spending however much it is for a shiny box that you plug in your back end. Excuse my French.
Right. Or yeah, that never gets implemented. Like,
Yeah,
how many
yeah.
places I've taken
But
over
then,
as
but then it's,
CISO.
it's back to a lot of businesses. You talk about policies and process. Unfortunately, I spent 20 years dealing with policies and process, and it's something I still have nightmares about now. But a lot of firms use or have policies as a form of ticking boxes, whether it's regulatory or compliance. And The problem is, if you haven't got the process above the policy, this is where people seem to be falling down in the smaller organizations where they
Mhm.
do an off the shelf kind of policy, but they've got no process behind it.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, process is definitely a huge challenge. Um, or you talked about some of the shiny object stuff. The board threw a lot of money at you, so you bought all these products without considering the people to support it or
Yeah.
the implementation costs. And I've walked
Well,
into
it's a bit like people or the board deciding that we're going to migrate to the cloud is what we're going to
right,
do, and we're going to
yeah,
pay a third party firm to do the migration, get it
yeah,
done, and then no one knows how to use it.
right, yeah, or
It
it's
goes wrong, or
yeah,
secure it, or
yeah, yeah. That's so yeah. I actually had a conversation with our board where they were saying, what more can we do for security? And I said, well, I can't implement anything more than what we already have taken on. And then the next question was, well, what more do you need to implement it? Do you need more people? Do you need like timeout? Like at some point, we need to pace ourselves so that what we're investing in is actually effective, so that then I can move on to the next thing. And just throwing more people at it isn't always the solution either. So, um, and so I think and then as far as future challenges, you know, there's just you never know what's going to happen next, right? And so I think part of how you protect against unknown challenges is the not fun, unsexy stuff of vulnerability management. Yeah. So I think with vulnerability management, again, it's not the shiny object. It's not an easy, hey, I bought this to fix this problem. It's really a process piece, and
but
it's really
there's
hard.
a million and one shiny boxes you can buy, Brian. There's
Yeah,
I saw all of them at RSA conference not so long back.
yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of people starting to try to make a play in that space, but the it's really hard work because that's where you have to pull in the rest of the organization. You have to start potentially impacting clients, um, and to do the patching. And then the other part is like people think, well, let's skip this one because we've got a really important whatever happening and we don't want to impact that. And then you get behind. And once you're
Yeah,
behind, it's really hard to catch up. So,
yeah.
but if you're not doing those things, everything else you could do, you're doing could be completely in vain because there's a 0 day you didn't patch and they walked right around all of your really cool shiny objects. Um, um, and so and then the whole quantum thing is going to get potentially very ugly.
Well, I saw a release in the US. Was it last week? The
Mhm.
first bit of research work that had gone into that from the US government perspective, which seemed to be ahead of the game compared to us over here. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, if that works, that's great. The other problem to think about is there's a lot of stolen data out there that's encrypted, and today I can't decrypt it.
Oh,
And once I have quantum capabilities, I may be able to decrypt all that, and now I've got this massive amount of information that could be damaging.
so how far are we away from that being a significant threat? Do you think? I saw that you can buy. Well, allegedly, I'll just change that. Allegedly, you can buy on the black market quantum computers now from China.
I think I can only guess, but my guess is that it's um, start out being relatively niche and super expensive, and then it's just going to explode before you know it. You'll have a quantum computer on your desk for $500.
Yeah, and it doesn't
Yeah,
feel like the security industry as a whole is up to pace with that, perhaps.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if anybody really knows what to do with it until you have one. So how do you have um, the right encryption without a quantum computer to create the encryption
Yeah.
to be able to encrypt against another quantum computer? And then how many different ways can you build a quantum computer that maybe my quantum computer can decrypt your quantum computer's encryption, but another one like yours can't. Like I don't know how that's all gonna.
It's a let's close that can of worms for now, and we'll worry about that next year, shall we?
Yeah, 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 and that's the thing too, right? What do you do about it? You just have to hold on and hope that it's not too bumpy of a ride, I guess. So
I mean, one of the biggest things I see as a challenge moving forward, you've already addressed actually briefly, which was recruitment. And it seems there are a lot of senior people, especially in the OT space, who know
mhm,
certain systems inside out, who
yep,
are of a certain age. And I'd suggest maybe even a few years older than us, Brian, where
hmm,
in a few years' time they're going to retire. And there's a big gap there where there's no one with the knowledge to replace them. And then you've got the mess of the rest of the industry where you've got lots of training providers promising boot camps for 12 weeks that will turn you into a cyber expert. You've
yeah,
got on the other side, a lot of this could be put down to the boot camps. The expectations of the candidates are slightly misguided,
yep,
perhaps, as to what they can expect from an entry level
yeah,
position. And then you look at the burnout side of
yes,
it, which every CISO I've spoke to the last 4 weeks has mentioned burnout. And I think at every level is a huge issue. And you mentioned, SOC teams earlier. Again, I know on some SOCs the burnout rate is extremely high. And again, until all those things are addressed, and who knows how to address them, I think it's just going to
yeah,
get worse.
yes,
I haven't
yeah,
mentioned hiring practices either, though, have I? I should have stuck that one in there as well.
yeah. It's definitely there's definitely a lot of challenges, and I think you brought up a really good one. The burnout side of it is huge.
I mean,
Um,
it's one I know of personally. I mean, anyone who's watched my earlier shows will know of my, rise and fall, I suppose you'd call it. And I burnt out completely, and I broke down a few years back, and I'm not afraid to say it in public either, because
mhm,
if anyone can learn from the warning signs that I didn't, you know,
yeah,
it's hugely important. And
yes,
even getting out in nature and walking and things like that, and the stuff that you don't
mhm,
find time for normally. I mean, that's now a huge part of my day. And without wanting
yeah,
to sound like an aging hippie, it's made a big difference to me as well.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. Is you know, being able to take care of yourself and figure out what you need. I think it also highlights that companies, as in CEOs and leadership of companies, need to think about their security staff differently. And at the end of the day, nobody's doing this for God and country. When it's not an altruistic adventure,
No,
um, and at some point, if you're not paying people enough, that's obviously going to be a problem really fast. But if you're creating an environment where you can't pay them enough to stay, then you're really and you're talking about it's not just cyber teams, but IT teams, technology people in general. They don't have to stay anywhere in
no.
this labor market, and sooner or later that's going to catch up. And I think there's a lot of companies that don't recognize that. And part of that equation is having a big enough team that somebody can actually take vacation,
Yeah.
and not get called while they're gone.
Or
Um,
having someone else trained up so they can deal with that while they're
right.
gone. Having
Yeah.
having that in place.
Mhm. So, and I think that that's, again, we'll give you just enough, which is never enough to maintain. And then, people feel like they can't take a break and they can't do whatever. And sooner or later, they'll take a break. They'll figure out, they'll go somewhere else, even if that's the only way they can get a break. So,
There's you see a lot of toxic culture comments on LinkedIn in particular.
mhm,
And but then you also, going off topic a bit, you've had the great resignation the last however
right.
long. And I've always had my concerns about that. Um,
Yeah.
it's propped up by a crypto economy that boomed, where people were shoving money into crypto and getting massive
Yeah.
returns. people have got the confidence to give their jobs up and go out on their own. And I think, I've always been an entrepreneur since I was 16, but
Hmm.
it's not all, like it's made out to be on
Right.
social media, driving Lamborghinis and having fun. It's an awful lot of stress. And I wonder whether as we see, we're clearly all going to go into a recession, whether it's last quarter this year, early quarter next year. I think for the US and the UK, it's inevitable now.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of people who've kind of the great resignation or decided to start up on their own. There's going
Yeah.
to be a mass exodus. I think you've already seen it in some industries where people are now
Yeah.
flooding back. And
Yeah.
I wonder whether
Yeah.
we'll see something similar in this industry, because there's an awful lot of new pen test firms sprung up
Yeah.
recently, new cyber consultancy firms where people have left big firms, set up on their own. And you know what happens with any market that's saturated like that, Brian?
Right.
It gets to a point
Yep.
where something needs to change, and
Yep.
it will.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think that the problem is the bigger firms who'll benefit from that, because they'll buy up the smaller ones, and then we're back to the
Mhm.
same problem we had before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a never ending deal. That's for sure. And I think we're starting to see the beginning of that too, that there's a lot of people that regretted resigning during the
Yeah.
Great Recession or resignation.
The Great
And
Recession's next year.
right. Exactly. And that's the other part of it too, is that, is if companies start laying a lot of people off, then the labor market shifts quickly. Right. And so, but I think in the cyberspace, it's different in that there's not enough people.
Yeah.
If you have layoffs, you don't want to be the company that laid off portion of your security staff, and then you got breached because the lawyers will just
Yeah, you're
love
done. Yeah.
that. And even if you get laid off, you can find a job in a matter of days, probably after that would happen. Um, So I think that's a little bit different. And then some of the rules that are coming out now with the SEC and some other um, more regulatory kind of things, I think we're going to see. So you talked about the future role of a CISO. Now we're
Yeah.
going to see, I think, that role having more opportunities, be on a board of directors
Well,
somewhere.
I think let's be
And,
honest, Brian, it should have already happened, in my
oh,
opinion. Um,
absolutely.
I know the SEC are the ones suggesting it in the States at the moment, or is pushing it through, aren't they? I don't think it's through yet, but there's nothing like that here, and it needs to
Yeah.
happen globally, I think, because until it's back to the changing role of the CISO, though, isn't it? What we started the conversation on, how important that is moving forward.
Yeah. And so now you think about it too, in terms of when you're talking to the board, the we're pretty far past the educating them because they don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But now you're going to have somebody on the board that knows a lot about it, and that can be good and bad, right? If it's
Yeah.
a good former CISO, then that would be a great discussion, and it'd be really good to have somebody and get their advice. If they think they were a good former CISO, or they were a CISO 10 years ago and they don't
Keep up to
understand.
date.
Yes, then that could be a really big challenge. And then when you talk about burnout, so now you're fighting with somebody that, because we've all met them, right? The CISOs that are just like, oh my God, like, what rock did you crawl out from under? And like, my favorite ones are the ones that are always complaining, the business will never support me. They'll never, and it's like,
Yeah.
listen to yourself. I wouldn't
Yeah.
support you. Like,
No,
you're just whining. Like, that's not how you get support.
I think you follow some of the same people as me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, so what am I doing? Because I'm telling the board, no, quit
Yeah.
giving me money. I can't
It's
responsibly
back to that
spend it.
skill set though, isn't it? And it can be learned. It's a
Yeah.
big thing for people to change their ways. And if you've been in a technical role for 30 years, and all of a sudden you've got to learn how to dynamically present to the board and explain risks that you don't actually know what they are,
Right.
it's a very difficult thing, which I think reflects even more on what we were saying about the importance of having those skills from before.
Yeah.
Whether it's the leadership skills, the people skills, it makes a
Yeah.
huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think it also speaks volumes to the if you have a very technical background and you're challenged by the things I talked about, quit going to your happy place. Because I think what you'll see is a lot of the CISOs go to the technical side of it, and they
Yeah.
can tell you all about, you know, firewall rules or something like that. And it's like, man, that's not important anymore. Like that's not your job, unless it's a really small company, perhaps. But um,
They're
you know, your
unlikely to have
job is
CISO.
yeah. Well, and your job is to know what right looks like in security. There's no, I don't care what you did from a technical standpoint in the past. You can't know everything that you're trying to secure at the level some of these people want to know it. And CIOs can be the same way too. You know, they can't get out of their own way. They're not comfortable with ambiguity. And I don't know how you can be in security and be so uncomfortable with ambiguity because you want to know everything about everything because you can't know that.
Yeah.
And so, but if going back to the people part, if you know people and you know what right looks like, it's amazing how quickly you can say our firewall guy doesn't know anything about firewalls, or he's still doing it the way he did it 10 years ago. And
That's back to, everything I say about the importance of the people side. It then goes back to the importance of still having that deep technical understanding of so much, doesn't it? That
yeah,
all of you CISOs have to have.
yeah.
You've got to at least have some kind of depth on each level, and that's why I'd never be a good CISO, or one of the
Well, I think,
reasons.
well, it goes back, you hire the right people. And then I always tell them, I have ideas, but I reserve the right to be wrong. I expect you to tell me if you think I'm wrong. And you ask a lot of open-ended questions and have them explain how they got to where they got to. And it's amazing how quickly you will understand enough about a technology that you don't know anything about, that you can start asking them the right questions to get them to where they think about it differently and come up with a better solution.
Yeah.
Um, and just being really comfortable not knowing something and asking questions.
I think
Um,
that's super
and
important. I mean, that's the dreaded three letters word there, ego, isn't it? I think
yeah,
ego can get in the way sometimes of some people not asking the right questions because they don't want to be seen to not being the all-knowing one, perhaps.
yeah, and I think part of it is that it's not part of it's ego, part of it is that's what they've been taught, right? So CIOs for the longest time wanted to know every nitty gritty detail of everything, so they think that's what you're supposed to do, or CISOs did that, or um, that's how they were challenged by their leaders, was getting down to these little details that really, if you hire the right people, those the kind of details they're digging into are taken care of. You don't
You
need
don't
to
need
know.
to talk about them. Yeah.
And and when you're doing that, you're missing the bigger picture pieces that you should be thinking about in terms of, what's my strategy look like? Where's my roadmap? What do I need to ask for budget? Do I have enough people? Do I need more people? Do I need more people in this area versus that area? Where are my skill sets at? What gaps do I have? How am I going to pass the HIPAA audit that we're doing right now? you know, um, how do I ascribe risk to the board? Because the last time I tried, it didn't work quite as well as I hoped it would. So then, what do I do this time? And and well, and then having the CEO say, "Well, I want the deck to look like this," and you put it together, and then the next time you show it to him, you're like, "No, no, it needs to be this way instead." And okay. I did a
That's
strategy deck 3 times for one of my CIOs, and he kept throwing it back at me saying that the executives would want something different. So I just went to the CEO instead. Said, "Hey, here's what I have," and he's like, "I don't want to know about any of that stuff." He said, "I just want you to take care of it." And so I went
fine
back to
here.
the CIO. Yep. So I went back to so I just quit giving the CIO new strategy decks that were all the same information, just different formats. I'm like, I'm not wasting my time on that anymore. I'm
No,
done. So
brilliant. Final question, I suppose, would be any advice for any aspiring CISOs out there? Because it's a massively growing area. You can stick the word V in front of it and see it everywhere all over LinkedIn at the
yeah.
moment. Any advice for those aspiring, especially those actually who are transitioning? Because I know a few personally who are in leadership roles in the military and thinking about
Mhm.
coming across to being a CISO. Let's focus on them.
As an aspiring CISOs, the thing that I would really encourage is that focus on the people side of it, the soft skills, the emotional intelligence, um, and relationships with your peers, um, leadership. You know, if you're not comfortable interviewing and hiring people and you just don't have a lot of experience with that, go find it.
Yeah.
You know, volunteer to help the CTO hire people or whoever. Um, because I've fortunately had a lot of experience interviewing people. Um, but really focus on the leadership side of it, and everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And you know, speaking of and the hiring piece, you know, focusing on not just learning how to interview if that's not something you've done a lot of or been comfortable with, because a lot of that's experience. You just got to do it. But also understanding that interviews are not a really great way to hire people. You know, they've been proven that they don't really work that well.
No.
But when you if you have to have a position open for 9 months, because that's how long it takes to find the right person, leave it open for 9 months. Don't
Yeah.
hire somebody just because they have a pulse and they have the skill sets you think that you need. And when you interview them, you should be interviewing them to see that they're a fit for your culture and that they have the right attitude. And if you hire somebody that's got a go-to attitude, that's not afraid of tackling something they don't know anything about, um, and is positive and is going to be an uplifting part of your team, but they don't have quite all the skills you want, I will take that person hands down over the
Me too.
perfectly skilled person that is just not a good fit with the team and the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I shouldn't even be talking to you if I don't think you have the technical skills. So when I'm talking to you, it's all about fit
Yeah.
and it's all about
It's
your
a good job you
personality.
wouldn't have spoke to me
Right.
at all if it was all about the technical skills.
Well, I've done in the past too, where I've I've set it up so that I brought somebody in. I've talked to them enough. I know that you know there's a good chance that they'll pass the interview process. And when I walked them out at the end of the day, just you know thank them for coming in for the interview, handed them their job offer right then.
Yeah, brilliant.
Um, you know, and well, actually, it sounds like it's brilliant, but it actually freaks some people out because they're like, "What? Like this is the what?" You know, it's just it's better to wait
It's
a day.
unnerving. Yeah.
I've learned it's better to wait a day. Just you know, you wouldn't think it, but I did it a few times and I realized that it kind of
Freaks
yeah.
people out. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that you know the process you explained is take them out to
I mean,
dinner. I mean, that's a
it's
great one,
fine
right?
though, isn't it, when you're talking about an
Yeah,
organization where you've got 50 people.
yeah,
Scale that up though, because then you're
right.
talking, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 employees. Try and adopt that I mean, again, that goes back to economies of scale, I suppose, and having
Right.
to having to look at different ways that you can try and achieve the same thing. And I mean,
Mhm.
while we're on the recruitment, you'll have the same interview for a technical role as you will for a sales role.
Right.
You'll have the face-to-face chat and then a
Yep.
meeting with 2 others and 3 of them on a table with you, and
Yeah.
if you're, hiring a technical person, there's a fairly high chance they're quite introverted. There's
Right.
a even bigger chance they're not gonna enjoy that situation at all. They're not gonna perform
Yeah.
as well as they would in a real work situation. So again, it's having an interview and a hiring process that's fit for the roles as well, I think, rather than
Yeah.
having a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, that's a great point because really the what I'm talking about is more hiring leaders,
Yeah,
not the technical folks.
yeah.
Um, and what I've found when it comes to the technical side of it is finding the right technical people on your team to do the interviews. And so,
Yeah,
is this somebody I want to work with? You know, and making sure that they have the right mindset in terms of, well, maybe they don't have all the skills that I think they should have, but man, I would love to work with this person. and they're
So
smart and they
this is telling me that we need to get rid of HR, right? Because
yeah.
HR are the ones causing all the problems with the hiring process. Because if you gave the responsibility to each team owner who's
Mm-hmm.
actually going to be working with the people, it could
Yeah.
solve a lot of problems, shouldn't it? But I think it'll probably cause a lot of upset in the HR world. So I might delete
Yeah.
that bit.
Yeah. I think that it kind of reflects what your company's doing, right? For come in and work with us for a day, and do we like working with you?
Yeah. And do you like
So,
working with us? I think is as well, isn't it? I
well,
mean, a
yeah,
job's a massive commitment. You spend
yeah,
so much of
yeah,
your time doing it. To do something and be in an environment that's, toxic or you're not
yeah.
enjoying is a sure way to be miserable.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a two-way process, and I think a lot of companies forget that. I don't
Yeah.
need to come work for you. And I've
No.
had companies where I was like, you know what? After I came and met you, I want nothing to do with you.
I've had 3 interviews very, very similar over the
Yeah.
last few months, and I won't name any names, but you know who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been 3 companies that I've, one, the poor hiring manager he called me up, he's all excited. He's like, "What'd you think? We're really excited about you." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, this isn't gonna work out." He's like, "Why?" And so I tried to tell him, which is
Politely.
funny because they'll never tell you why when they don't hire you. But
No, but
yeah,
they wanna know why you don't want the job. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I had a couple of those where I think I just dodged a bullet. So,
Yeah, it's
but
sometimes better to walk away. Brian, we've gone over time. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and the insights throughout your career as well. If you've enjoyed watching this, people, please do like and subscribe to the content. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, that's it from me, Simon, your host, and Brian. Thank you so much for your time.
thanks, Simon. Appreciate it.
Cheers.